This video is for lesson 4.2, and our learning target for this lesson is going to be I can identify congruent figures and corresponding parts. And I just want to remind you that you want to be writing in your notes using pencil. And of course, please do write in the learning target at the top of your page. And if you have not been completing all of the notes, meaning that you've also done the on your own problems, please make sure you do that to get full credit for your notes. And we are going to start with the vocabulary. In this lesson, we need to understand that in two congruent figures, all of the parts of one figure are congruent to the corresponding parts of the other figure. In congruent polygons, this means that corresponding sides and the corresponding angles are congruent. So if we're talking about corresponding just means that they are in the same position. Okay, so they are in the same spot or the same place in each of the polygons that are congruent. And in our case, we're going to be talking mostly about triangles, but they do have an example here that has some five-sided figures. So we're going to look at that in just a moment, but let's take a look at the theorem, the third angles theorem. That's what I'll refer to it as. If two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then, of course, the third angles are also congruent. Okay, that's a congruent symbol. If, let's just say we have two triangles and one angle, is congruent, and then we have a second angle congruent, then obviously the third one also has to be the same angle measure because all triangles have to add up to 180 degrees. All right, let's see what they want us to do here in example number 1. It says, use properties of congruent figures, and it says that in the diagram, this figure is congruent to this figure. Now there's a couple important pieces of information you can get from the way that they've named this. If you take a look at the first figure, they start at point A over here and go to point B. So A, B, and that's going to be congruent to F, G in the other figure. So the first two letters are FG in the right figure, and the first two letters in the left figure are AB. So that means then that A corresponds to F, B corresponds to G, C corresponds to H, etc. So as the way that the name of the figure is written, you can tell which parts are congruent. So basically we have symmetric figures. If I draw a line down the middle here, this D point is exactly the same as the point I in the other figure. So really we could fold this down the middle on these little red dots that I've made, and we would have an exact figure. C is going to be coordinated and corresponding to H. All right, so it's asking us to, first of all, list the corresponding parts. So we need to list all the sides that are congruent. And as I mentioned a second ago, we know which sides are congruent based on the way that they are listed in the two names. So AB is a side that is congruent to side FG. The first two letters that we see in the names of those two figures are congruent. And then if we move to the next two letters, we would see that BC is congruent to GH. Okay, so you can actually look at the figure to see that GH and BC are the same side, or in the same position on each figure, or you can look at the name of the figure that's listed there. And then of course we have CD, which is going to be congruent to HI, and HI is this little short side here, and CD also the short side there. All right, and then we have DE in the left figure, and DE is corresponding to IJ. And since it's a segment, of course, we put the line over top. And then our last side, or last corresponding side pair is going to be AE, is congruent to FJ. So FJ and AE are those bottom sides. And if you didn't notice already, in the name, J is the last letter, F is the first letter, and that makes up that side. And AE, the first and last letter in the names up there, also make up the last side. So if it's a five-sided figure, make sure that you list 5 corresponding side pairs. And then we're going to say which angles are corresponding right now. So we can say that angle A is congruent to angle F. Angle B is congruent to angle G. Angle C is congruent to angle H. Angle D is congruent to angle I. And then finally, angle E is congruent to angle J. So once we get that done, then they're going to ask us here to find the value of x and find the value of y. So x looks like it's part of this side here, 3x plus 4, and because it's corresponding to this side that's 10, we're going to set those equal to each other. So 10 is going to equal 3x plus 4, and all we need to do is solve now. So if I subtract 4 here and here, I end up with 6 equals 3x. And if I divide by 3 on both sides, I can see that x is going to equal 2. Okay, so I divided by 3 on both sides, and x equals 2. Now I need to find the value of y, and y is part of this expression right here, and this was showing us that this angle is 8y minus 9, and the corresponding angle, remember the corresponding angle to angle I is angle D, so 47 is going to equal 8y minus 9. So let's go ahead over here and do that. 47 equals 8y minus 9. And if I add 9 to both sides, because that's my first step in solving this, I won't have the minus 9 there anymore. I'll have an 8y equals 56. And I know that 8 goes into 56 7 times. So y is going to equal 7. So there's quite a few things to do on that type of problem, and then they have here a practice problem for you to do. So you're going to do the exact same thing. First you're going to list the corresponding sides and the corresponding angles, and then of course you're going to find the value of y and the value of x. Just make sure that you can see that there's a side length here and a side length here, and then of course we have angles that are going to match up. Angle that's marked 22 degrees is going to be corresponding to this one here. So please find the value of x and y after you list the corresponding sides and angles. And in order to get a stamp for your notes, make sure you do that part. The on your own has to be done in order to get your stamp. On the back of your note sheet, you have another on your own practice problem, but I am going to help you set this one up because there is a correction that I would like you to make. The 6y plus 4 that you see in the right figure really should be down here at the vertex of F. So 6y plus 4 should be here in the angle F instead. And then I'd also like to point out, I know that you may not already be familiar with this type of figure, but 70 degrees is going to be the angle of angle A and angle B, and that's because this is a isosceles trapezoid, which we really haven't learned about much, but that would make angle D 110 and also angle C 110, because these two angles A and D have to add up to 180, and these two angles B and C have to add up to 180. So I just wanted you to know that the value of those angles is different, or maybe you didn't know what those were. I also see that this length here, side AB, is 8, and this side here is 2x minus 6. So I'm going to go ahead and help you set this up, because we do have to find the value of x and the value of y. And if we see the names of the angles here, A and E are corresponding, B and F are corresponding, C and G are corresponding, and then D and H are corresponding. So because these are congruent figures, then we know that angle A is going to be the same angle measure as angle E. And so we also know then that angle B is going to be the same as angle F. So let's go ahead and set that one up first. So 70 is going to equal 6y plus 4. And so you can set that up, or now that it's set up, you should be able to solve that one. And then I want to point out that I want to set up another equation because I have my side here. It's going to be equal to 8. So 8 is going to equal 2x minus 6. All right, so please go ahead and set up a list of all the corresponding parts over here on the right, and then also please solve for x and y. And our last example I have here is to use the third angles theorem. And so we need to find the measure of angle F. So what is the measure of angle F? Well, it looks like we have an angle here marked congruent to the angle over here. So that means that angle A is going to be the same measure as angle D. And angle B has two arcs on it, and therefore angle B is going to be congruent to angle E. So there we have a 30 and we have a 110, and we know that angle C has to be the same as angle F. So angle C and angle F are congruent. So basically we just take the 180 degrees that we know a triangle adds up to. So 180 is the sum of a triangle. And so I can subtract 110 and I can subtract 30 and I can find out what the measure of angle F is. It looks like I'm actually subtracting 140 here, so if I add up 110 and 110 and 30, I'm subtracting 140 from 180 and that just leaves me with 40. So that means that angle F is 40 degrees. So to finish up your notes, you're going to need to do number 5. And you're going to need to do number 6. So we're looking for the value of x in this picture and also the value of x here. So I'd just like to give you a hint that this angle right here is going to be congruent to itself because remember, it's a vertical angle. And so I'll just give you that little hint. And then of course this will also be a third angles theorem type thing. But remember that 5 needs to be distributed to both things inside that binomial, so we would end up with this being 15x plus 25, right? So that's going to be something that you're going to need to use to solve for x. And if you have any questions at all, please make sure you write them down, and I'll be happy to answer them in class.